All right, welcome in. It's Illinois in Focus Daily, live each and every weekday morning. I'm Greg Bishop. Thanks for being with us. And we've got several things to look forward to for the rest of the week. Tomorrow, we'll have new data expected from the U.S. Census. So we'll see whether or not Illinois continues beyond a decade of decline or if we're going to see any improvement in the population estimates. We'll also have a hearing on the firearm owner identification card case. That's in the Fourth Circuit Illinois Appeals Court. The case from Gun Save Life that was in a district court in Sangamon County. It ultimately moved to the appeals courts in state court. So you've got a hearing there scheduled for tomorrow. So those are some things just to look forward to this week as we head into the Christmas holiday. And of course, during the Christmas week, pretty sure I'm going to take several days off. So just a programming note. Look forward to taking a breather for a bit to enjoy the holidays. So all of that, of course, just a little bit of a preview of things for the rest of this week. But we've got a lot to cover today. Everything from a conversation about sports equity and men's and women's sports. This is something we were going to talk about yesterday, but we held it off. And actually, I'm kind of glad we did because there was an interesting several exchanges at a U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee dealing with women's sports and men's sports. So we'll tackle that conversation. We'll also hear about the Electoral College meeting yesterday all across the country. And in Illinois, in Springfield, you had the meeting of the 19 electors casting their votes for Kamala Harris. But I talked with Secretary of State Alexi Janulius and State Representative Maurice West about their thoughts on the Electoral College and whether or not they agree with Illinois U.S. Senator Dick Durbin that it needs to be done away with. So all of that's coming up. But next, let's talk about Illinois' economic picture. And Governor J.B. Pritzker being asked about this recently. I got reaction from State Senator Andrew Chesney earlier this week, and we'll also revisit some of the conversation we had with Ted Dabrowski of WirePoints about how to address the state's economy. So stay tuned. It's all on the way here with Illinois in Focus Daily. Be sure to wake up with the headlines in your inbox. Go to thecentersquare.com. Again, thecentersquare.com, where you can sign up for the newsletter. Also, you can wake up with us here at America's Talking Network to get the latest each and every weekday morning. Plus, you can get the podcast if you can't join us live. So do all of that. All right, search for Illinois in Focus, and you'll find it.
Again, it's takes a long time to change the trajectory. You're moving an aircraft carrier when you're changing the trajectory of a state's growth rate.
It's Governor J.B. Pritzker last week being asked about Illinois' sluggish economy and what he's doing about it. It is Illinois in Focus Daily. I'm Greg Bishop. Be sure to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and wake up with us each and every weekday morning. Join a lively bunch in the live chat. We go live at about 8 o'clock Central, so if you're interested in what's going on in Illinois, this is the show for you. All right, so let's get into Illinois' economic picture. It's no surprise. For as long as I've been covering Illinois, the state has lagged the national average on economic data. For instance, you remember the Great Recession, 2007, 2008, 2009. It took Illinois more than 10 years to fully rebound from that economic crisis. Now, after the COVID crises, you have Illinois still behind the national average in rebounding. Recent data shows that the state's jobs have only grown 0.7% over the past year, and only 0.02% since 2019. When you look at the unemployment picture, Illinois' unemployment picture is the third worst in the nation, and a full percentage point higher, plus 0.1 of the national average. Right now, I think 5.3% is what Illinois is at. You've got the national average of 4.2%. You look at all the neighboring states in Illinois, and we're definitely an outlier when it comes to economic progress. But we've heard, in the past from elected officials, and including Governor J.B. Pritzker, about Illinois being a major hub for the nation's infrastructure, for the nation's supply chain, getting things where they need to go, rail, ports, highway systems, and such. So you would think we'd have a huge advantage when it comes to propelling the economy forward. But the governor was asked about Illinois' sluggish economy and how his administration is trying to rev up those trends, make Illinois a growth state.
Yeah, I would remind you that when I took office, Illinois was in this similar position, right, where there's a lower growth economy for the state of Illinois than there has been for the United States more broadly. That's something I've been very interested and focused on changing. I was in business before I became governor. I have always believed that Illinois could do so much better. As you know, we've had a series of crises that have hit this state, not the least of which was the COVID-19 crisis. So there are things that have impeded our progress in the state. Having said that, as you know, over the last 2.5 years, basically since the end of the COVID crisis, if you can say that it's fully ended, I think it has, the crisis part of it anyway. We've been very focused in my administration on growing the economy, on attracting jobs and businesses, and that's working. But again, it takes a long time to change the trajectory. You're moving an aircraft carrier when you're changing the trajectory of a state's growth rate. But we're making progress, and I look forward to, you'll hear some announcements as you have in the past. I don't make these things up. People often have asked me, when are we going to hear and then you hear them, but nobody takes into account that I promised them and I delivered them. And you'll hear more announcements about that as well.
So the governor obviously talking about announcements of businesses coming. I believe last week he announced IBM was going to be part of the Quantum campus up in Chicago. They're getting state grant dollars. That whole operation up there is getting all kinds of tax benefits. But the governor's also highlighted tax credits for electric vehicle companies, tax credits for data center development in the state, tax credits for this and that and such. Well, I asked State Senator Andrew Chesney earlier this week, Republican from Freeport, about the governor having these tax credits to spur on more business, but is it really helping, and what needs to change in the state of Illinois?
Yeah, tax credits are just picking winners and losers, and it's crony capitalism that is wrong, right? We need to lower the tax base or lower the tax burden for all businesses collectively as a whole. And so Governor Pritzker loves to pick his winners and losers so he can do his ribbon cuttings, but that's only for the politically connected that get those tax credits. And so if you take a look at the adverse business climate that is present in Illinois, that coincides and that moves in the same vein of why we're having the sluggish job creation that we're having in Illinois, is because who in their right mind would want to build a business, create a business, start a business, or move to Illinois when you have Governor Pritzker wanting to have a supercharged sanctuary state? You're not going to have the types of businesses that want to move to Illinois to generate real economic growth. So as a consequence of his policies, you are now seeing that we fall behind all of our neighbors such as Iowa, Wisconsin, Indiana, Missouri, and others. And so what we need to do is we need to cut taxes, not raise taxes. We need to plug the $3.2 billion budget deficit through spending cuts. And we need to make it unequivocally clear we are not going to raise taxes under any circumstance in the state of Illinois in 2025. The businesses, Greg, they need to have tax certainty, and they need to know what the tax consequences are going to be in our state. And when you're looking down the barrel of a $3.2 billion budget deficit, and if you take a look at the history of what the Democrats have done since they've been in the majority party, they have almost historically always raised taxes and cut nothing.
So, Chesney talking about a couple of things there that need to change for the state's economy to improve. Lower taxes, cut spending. We've heard others and Republicans for as long as I've covered the State House have talked about high workers' comp costs. They've talked about the high property taxes. These things impact a business's ability to expand and invest, and other things that cost a lot of money, including the state's unfunded pension liability. When I chatted with Ted Dabrowski last week about the state's pension situation, I asked him how pension reform could possibly play into changing the state's economic trajectory, and he said it's paramount.
Well, I would argue that, if you're a company, Warren Buffett said it well quite a few years ago. He said he would never move into Illinois with all those pension debts. So, you can talk about economic reform all you want, but as long as in Illinois you have this pension debt, companies are not going to invest big here, just like people aren't going to invest big here. That's why they're leaving. So until you get pension reform, and I'd add the second thing with that is this public sector union reductions in powers. When you combine those two things, we'll get economic growth just by doing that. But right now we don't send any good signals to the public. We don't send any good signals to the rest of the country as far as us being an economic growth engine, because we refuse to touch pensions. The minute we would do a dramatic change in pensions, I tell you, I think it would change the mentality of how people think about Illinois. But of course, it would indicate something big, because that means lawmakers finally agreed to do something about pensions. So,
and what Dabrowski says needs to be done about pensions is a constitutional amendment needs to be passed to allow for voters to sound off on whether or not, again, the Constitution's pension protection clause needs to be changed. But there has not been any political will at the State House to make that happen. It's Illinois in Focus Daily. I'm Greg Bishop. Like, subscribe, hit that notification bell. Wake up with us each and every weekday morning for the latest here in Illinois.
Electors and guests, we have tallied the ballots. It is my pleasure to announce that Kamala D. Harris has received 19 electoral votes for president from the great state of Illinois.
The Electoral College meeting in Springfield yesterday, officially voting for Kamala Harris, who got all of Illinois' 19 Electoral College votes. States all across the country yesterday was the day that they went with their electors and they voted for who they wanted to see take the White House. Donald Trump, though, across the country, securing the necessary Electoral College votes to make that happen. So he is set to be inaugurated January 20th after Congress affirms and approves the vote of the Electoral College on January 6th. It is Illinois in Focus Daily. Yesterday, a historic day, no question about it. The Electoral College meeting. Here is some of the highlights of that meeting from yesterday at the state capitol. And let's fire it off. Go.
Voters in Illinois cast their votes for president and vice president of the United States of America. Through those votes, they were also voting for presidential and vice presidential electors. Today, those electors from each of the 50 states and the District of Columbia are meeting to cast their votes for the next president and vice president of the United States of America. Here in Illinois, we are gathering for the 52nd meeting of the Illinois Electoral College, and the electors present today are representing the majority vote of almost 5.6 million Illinoisans who cast their ballot for president and vice president in the November 5th election. As required by federal law, copies of today's certified vote will be sent to the President of the United States Senate, the National Archives, and the Chief Federal Judge of this federal district. My office will also maintain an additional copy of the certification of the vote for public inspection. Today is about preserving our democracy. Today is a special day for every American, regardless of whether you are Democrat or Republican. Today is what makes this country the greatest nation in the history of the world. It's respect for the democratic process. Thank you. Elector Vera Davis, please come forward and cast your vote.
Good morning. It is my honor and my privilege to represent the people of the 7th Congressional District to cast this historical ballot for a person who has broken barriers for women, and particularly women of color, and also my sister in the sorority, Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. I cast this vote for Kamala Harris and Vice President Tim Walz.
Because we talk about democracy, we talk about voter participation, we talk about encouraging people to vote, and today is the ultimate step of that. So I'm proud of it. I wish we had even more people paying attention to the whole process. To me, it's exciting, and as I mentioned in my comments, that's why we're the greatest democracy in the history of the world. Electors and guests, we have tallied the ballots. It is my pleasure to announce that Kamala D. Harris has received 19 electoral votes for president from the great state of Illinois.
So yesterday, big day, obviously. It's just the next phase in the presidential election that happened last month, and Illinois playing its role with its 19 Electoral College votes. So, a lot of conversation about the Electoral College. I asked the Secretary of State afterwards to respond to U.S. Senator Dick Durbin from Illinois filing a constitutional amendment to get rid of the Electoral College. Durbin said in a statement that the 18th century invention is outdated, and it disenfranchises millions of voters. He believes that it should be the popular vote that determines who is president of the United States, not the Electoral College that is baked into the U.S. Constitution and would require a constitutional amendment to be passed in the proper process for that to be removed. I don't know if that's going to happen anytime soon. But Secretary of State Alexis Giannoulias says that he's going to uphold the Constitution as long as the Electoral College is there. Here he is from yesterday after the Illinois presidential electors met.
I love Senator Durbin. He's my friend. I will tell you, in my role as Secretary of State, I follow the Constitution, state and federal laws and guidelines. That's very important to me. If you're asking me personally how I feel about the Electoral College, I guess my statement would be I care tremendously about increasing voter turnout and increasing voter participation. What I've heard anecdotally is that if we had a popular vote, you'd have more people participating, more people voting in states where they think that their vote doesn't matter, where they never see a commercial. So, again, on the personal side, I would agree with Senator Durbin. It's probably an antiquated process. As Secretary of State, I'm here to uphold the Constitution and all state laws, and I'm proud of that duty.
So Giannoulias saying that maybe it is antiquated, but it's the law of the land, and as Secretary of State, it's his responsibility to oversee the Electoral College. But I also asked about whether or not the Electoral College should be proportional. Illinois is a winner-take-all state, but if you look at Illinois' map, most of the state's counties went to Trump. The actual congressional district outcome, obviously Democrats would win there, but if you broke it up to where if it was indeed 55-45, then maybe the Electoral College vote from Illinois should reflect that proportional outcome, so that maybe Illinois' votes could be split up. Maybe that would allow for people to see how it could be representational across the country. But again, most states, I think only 2 do a winner-take-all, Illinois being a winner-take-all state. And the question obviously about, Durbin saying it disenfranchises people having the Electoral College, doesn't winner-take-all also kind of disenfranchise people? Regardless, Secretary of State Alexis Giannoulias says he wants Illinois to be a winner-take-all state.
I believe in the winner-take-all process that we have. And again, I think the bigger question is whether we move to a popular vote or whether we continue with the Electoral College. But again, in my role as Secretary of State, my job is to follow the Constitution in all state and federal laws.
I also chatted with State Representative Maurice West, some Democrat from Rockford. He was a presidential elector, the first time he's been involved in this process, which happens every 4 years with presidential elections.
It was a good experience. It was an honor to be here. I was able to do my part and make sure that the voices of the elected were heard, and that's what we did on today.
And I asked him about Durbin's proposal. He hadn't seen it yet, but I also asked about all of the controversy around the Electoral College, stretching all the way back to the year 2000, and then in 2016, Trump winning the Electoral College, but not the popular votes, and then in 2020, questions about the Electoral College. But this year, Trump not only won the Electoral College, he won the popular vote as well. But does that still impact concerns of those who want to try to get rid of the Electoral College?
The concerns are valid. I will say that. Conversations need to become more aggressive when it comes to this talking point and what needs to happen, especially in light of those numbers, those years that you said. But yeah, there is cause for concern. And
to the idea of proportional Electoral College outcomes in Illinois, going, adverse to being a winner-take-all state, West is on the current House Elections Committee. He possibly could be on the chair of the Elections Committee for the new General Assembly that's going to be seated January 8th. But here he is talking about he's open to a conversation about changing the state from winner-take-all to proportional.
Some may feel that way, some may not. That's a good conversation to have. If there's colleagues of mine in the 104th General Assembly that wants to raise that conversation, I'm more than willing to have it. But for now, Illinois is a winner-take-all state, and that's where we'll stay.
So the Electoral College doing their thing yesterday. The next phase in the presidential election involves the certification of the Electoral College with the Congress January 6th, and then the inauguration on January 20th. We'll watch all of that. It is Illinois in Focus Daily. Like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and join us each and every weekday morning, breaking down things to keep you going and keeping you plugged in. It's right here with America's Talking Network. Get the headlines in your inbox with thecentersquare.com, and also get the podcast where you get podcasts. Just search Illinois in Focus.
States in NCAA schools?
510,000.
How many transgender athletes are you aware of?
Less than 10.
Senator Dick Durbin yesterday during a U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee hearing on sports betting and college sports and the impact of it. But the conversation turned towards the issue of biological men competing in women's sports. And the issue of sports in general having several headlines outside of the actual, who's on the field and who won which game and so on. But policies around sports coming right here even to a state like Illinois. It's Illinois in Focus Daily. I'm Greg Bishop. Of course, we'll touch on some of the conversation out of that U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee from yesterday. But earlier this week, an Illinois House Committee held a hearing about the issue of public dollars for professional sports facilities. This has been a running issue for the past year and a half, if not 2 years, of, up in Chicago, are the Bears going to go to Arlington Heights? They bought some property there. They said, they're going to build this huge complex, and then there was property tax issues there. And then they came back and said, we want to build something on the lakefront. It's going to cost like $4.6 billion. We'll put in $2 billion of it. We're looking for some state tax dollars. You got the White Sox also looking for new facilities and possibly looking for state tax dollars as well. And a variety of other different types of sports facility updates that people are trying to find out how to make happen, but is there any appetite for tax dollars to be used in that? Well, a lot of the conversation is really focused on men's sports in Illinois. And earlier this week, the House Revenue and Finance Committee heard a legislator's proposal to, if there's going to be any consideration of tax dollars for sports facilities, then it shouldn't just be for men's sports. It should also be for women's sports. So here is a state representative that is talking about the bill that she has to bring about this equity in sports facility funding.
Thank you to members of the Revenue Committee for allowing me to come before you today and talk about House Bill 5841. I like to call this the equity amendment. And the reason that we use that terminology is because when we talk about professional women's sports teams, we don't always think about the history of how those women's sports teams have had to claw and fight to get to the point where they are today. And let's be honest, right now they're killing it. We have seen some amazing movement in this industry, watching people have excitement over women's professional sports. But for decades, women's professional sports teams have been forced to strive for that commercial success, but they've had to operate with bootstrapped infrastructure. I'm sure many of you will remember some of the coverage that we saw of the Women's World Cup and how they had subpar facilities. You see that in the Olympics as well, that they are not being treated in the same way that men's sports are. And so this is an attempt to try and right size and right some of those wrongs from the past. So over the past 50 years, publicly funded or subsidized stadiums have been the norm for men's professional sports franchises. 89% of teams in the 4 major U.S. professional sports leagues play in stadiums that have received taxpayer subsidies. Professional women's sports teams have received none, 0 public infrastructure support in Illinois. And when we talk about this particular legislation, I want to be very clear. It does not authorize any funding for any stadiums. This is essentially creating some equity when we talk about the possibility of providing any public support for any stadiums. So essentially what we do here, the Commission on Equity and Inclusion will prepare and submit an annual report to the General Assembly evaluating whether the Illinois Sports Authority, or IFSA, has met the Commission and Authority's equity goals.
It's State Representative Eva Dina Delgado with her bill. And again, to stress, she says the bill does not free up any tax dollars here. It doesn't involve spending any tax dollars. It just simply says if tax dollars are going to be spent for sports facilities, then you got to get this Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Commission involved to make sure that it's equitable for women's sports as well. But to the idea of tax dollars being used for sports facilities in general, this is back from April. Governor J.B. Pritzker was asked about this, and he said he's a Bears fan, but he doesn't see any appetite for tax dollars to go to sports facilities at all.
The problem is that the offer that they've made just isn't one that I think the taxpayers are interested in getting engaged in. And I've said this before today, but I'll just repeat it, that if the Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs can't get the people of their area to authorize the building of a new stadium, and we've seen this fail over and over across the United States, I don't really think that the people of Chicago or across Illinois feel any different than they did.
And House Speaker Emanuel Chris Welch was at that same event back in April of this year, being asked if there's any appetite for legislators to free up tax dollars for professional sports facilities like the Bears.
I'm going to say to you publicly what I said to Kevin Warren privately last week. If we were to put this issue on the board for a vote right now, it would fail, and it would fail miserably. There's no environment for something like this today. Now in Springfield, environments change. Will that environment change within the next 30 days? I think that's highly unlikely. I think there's a whole lot of Chicago Bears fans in the General Assembly, but our priorities are pretty clear. And we, starting next week, have 1 month to pass another balanced budget.
And again, this was back in April of this year. So they didn't do anything with sports facilities. They didn't do anything fall veto session with sports facilities. Will they do anything in lame duck? He says it's not going to change in 30 days or so. That was back in April. Have things changed since, especially with the House committee looking at equity when it comes to sports funding. So will this go where it goes to the public taxpayer? I guess we'll watch and see. But not the only policy issue that made some headlines this week when it comes to sports. The issue of sports betting was the focus of a U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee yesterday, chaired by Senator Dick Durbin from Illinois. And the conversation steered away a little bit from sports betting in general to Republican Senator Marsha Blackburn talking about biological men in women's sports and having a collegiate official there to try to find out what they're doing to what she wants is to protect women's sports from men competing against them.
I am still disappointed that there is not an NCAA policy to protect women in competition. You all have had time to do this. Our female athletes deserve it. And if you're going to partner up on gambling and other things, and we applaud that, you have got to make certain that you are protecting women's sports for women. We hear about this every single week from female collegiate athletes and their concerns. You all have the ability to do better. It is important that you do better, and it is imperative that you protect opportunity for women in sports.
So the issue, obviously, something that women are approaching senators and legislators about. They want to make sure that biological men aren't competing against women in sports, be it high school and college and beyond. And the issue is important to certain groups. But Senator Dick Durbin seemed to downplay that a bit in his line of questioning with this NCAA official.
How many athletes are there in the United States in NCAA schools?
510,000.
How many transgender athletes are you aware of?
Less than 10.
Less than 10 out of 510,000?
Yep.
So Durbin highlighting it's less than 10 of 510,000 of the collegiate athletes out there are transgender. So, they, I guess, shouldn't worry about those impacted by the 10 transgender athletes in the sports of the opposite sex. So their concerns being downplayed a bit there by Senator Dick Durbin. But obviously, still a lot of frustration. Missouri U.S. Senator Josh Hawley with his line of questioning about this particular issue.
And your guidelines say that biological men can go in and use the women's locker rooms if they want to. What the women want has nothing to do with it. They're not mentioned in here at all. Correct? Correct. It's right here. You just reaffirmed them in May of this year. I've got them. I'm reading them. I've got them off your website.
I believe our guidelines give people optionality with respect to how they choose to use their facilities. And many,
what does that even mean? Optionality. What it says is transgender student athletes will be able to use the locker room, shower, and toilet in accordance with their gender identity. That means men will be able to use the women's locker rooms. And as Riley Gaines and others have testified before this committee, that means if a man, a biological man, wants to use their locker room, they just have to accept it. Or else the women have to go somewhere else. They've got to go find an alternative. Why is that fair?
We told the local folks who've hosted our tournaments they need to create accommodations for the people who are playing.
So it's the feds on the one hand, it's the locals on the other hand. The only person who doesn't seem to bear any responsibility in this is you and the NCAA, who are the governing body. And your testimony here today is you're not even subject to Title IX. Mr. Baker, I can't tell you how disappointed this makes me, but not just disappointed, frankly, infuriated for the student athletes who are suffering because of your policies, and you won't even defend them. You won't even take responsibility. It's outrageous. It's totally outrageous.
And we'll hear, obviously, a lot more about this and other issues as we continue forward here with Illinois in Focus Daily. I'm Greg Bishop. Like, subscribe, hit that notification bell. Wake up with us each and every weekday morning and get the headlines in your inbox with thecentersquare.com. I got for you on this, it is Wednesday, right? Tomorrow we'll do some preview of the FOID card case that's going to be heard in the Appellate Court District of Illinois. Then also we've got to do a preview of the census data, kind of reflect on the past 10 years of decline, what we could expect with the census data being released possibly tomorrow. The census is they don't do embargoes anymore where they put the information out ahead of time. They just release it and say have at it. So we could get that stuff tomorrow after the show, but we'll do a preview tomorrow. Plus, I'm pouring over nearly 300 new laws that go into effect January 1st. We'll do what we can to unpack those over the next rest of the week. Maybe do some short programs throughout the week next week, but we'll also be gearing up to head towards lame duck session after the new year for the Illinois General Assembly. So if you want to stay plugged in with what's going on here, of course, like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, join us each and every weekday morning for Illinois in Focus Daily, and get the podcast where you get podcasts. Just search Illinois in Focus and you'll find it. I don't want you to not get the daily newsletter, where you can sign up at thecentersquare.com, thecentersquare.com, and you can get Illinois news or news out of Washington, D.C., so that you're really plugged in to what's going on. All right, have a wonderful Wednesday, and we'll see you back here tomorrow with Illinois in Focus Daily.